Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jennifer Maraña. I am the CEO and founder of Maraña Consulting, where I do diversity, equity, and inclusion training and consulting. But before that, just last year, I spent 3 unforgettable years at Broadmead in Cockeysville, Maryland, as their vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And working with older adults, I really found my passion in doing diversity work for in these communities. And so prior to that, I did diversity, equity, and inclusion work in higher education, in healthcare, and am now consulting with organizations across the country. So today, we are going to focus on belonging. And, the term, sometimes you'll hear diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. You'll hear that term. We're all familiar with it. But we are going to delve deeper into what does this mean? What does this look like? And reflecting on, are we cultivating that kind of community already? And what more can we do to deepen that sense of belonging among our residents, among our staff members, in our organizations overall? So like Sarah said, I really do invite your interaction, especially via the chat box. So as questions arise, please feel free to put those in the chat box. I will also be asking you questions. So I invite your interaction and your responses as I ask you to reflect on this idea of belonging and some aspects around it. So let me share my screen here. And please, if you can't hear me or if you have any questions, feel free to stop me, whether that's via the chat box or putting yourself or taking yourself off mute. I do welcome that. All right, so you belong here, right? We all belong here, but we might not fully feel that sense of belonging at times. And so what does that mean and what does that look like? I'm going to ask us to start with, and this is where the interaction in the chat box continues beyond your introductions, I'm going to ask you to share a time and space when you felt like you belonged, or when maybe you currently feel like you belong there. Maybe it's when you're with your family, maybe it's among friends, certain friendships, certain friend groups. Maybe it was when you were on a sports team as a kid or in college. Is it your church? Is it a support you're part of? Your workplace? Project, maybe you worked on a project at work and suddenly there was this sense of, wow, I belong here, I belong with this group. Is it your hometown? Is it a recreational activity you're part of? So would love some comments in the chat box. We'll pause and invite you to just reflect as we're talking about belonging today, to bring us into this space and help us reflect on our own sense of what this word means to us and how we've experienced it. Would love for some sharing in the chat box around a time or a space when you felt like you belonged or where you currently feel like you belong. And then Sarah, it's hard for me to check the chat sometimes when I'm presenting. So if there are any comments in there that you wouldn't mind speaking to, feel free.
Yeah, sure. I'll just read through a few of them. Sharing food with chosen family in my home or others' homes. At church with my family.
Yeah, nice. Food, church.
In my neighborhood.
So this feeling, this sharing, or this time and space of feeling belonging, right? Whether it's, sharing food, it's with family, in your neighborhood. Anything else, Sarah?
Teaching a resident a new skill, in nature.
Nice. So this is just a snapshot of a variety of ways in which we feel the sense of belonging, spaces where we feel it, right? And so keep those coming through the chat box. I want you to, and continue to check the chat box as well and see what your colleagues are sharing, because belonging will feel different and look different for each one of us. And so as we reflect on this sense and feeling of belonging, I want to share with you, this is a diversity wheel. And sometimes when it comes to a sense of belonging, there are aspects of who we are that connect to that sense of belonging. So for some, it might be work related, right? It might be something that we're doing in the workplace. For some, I remember with a group I spoke with, it was parental status. They were a woman had shared that she had had her first child and was in a group of other new moms, and it just she felt this huge sense of belonging because it was so new to her, and she felt so lost in raising this little baby on her own. And so being able to connect with other new moms was really the space where she felt like she belonged. I mentioned that my background is in higher education. When I worked colleges and universities, sometimes there would be affinity groups, group organizations, some based on interests, right? Some based on, the chess club or sports team. Some of it was race related, right? There was a Black Student Union. There was an LGBTQ organization, right? And so sometimes when it comes to feeling a sense of belonging, it's related to interests. Sometimes it's related to aspects of our identity. Sometimes it's related to aspects of our journeys in our lives. Sometimes it's workplace. And so I share this diversity wheel for you just to really think about how belonging can look different and feel different based on our own lived experiences. So synonyms for belonging, right? So when we talk about belonging, feelings of acceptance, affiliation, association, attachment, bond, closeness. I'm not going to read all of these, but you see them right in front of you, right? There's so many ways in which belonging shows up, and on top of these synonyms, when it comes to a sense of belonging, oftentimes these are spaces and times when we feel like we can show up as our authentic selves. So when we are talking about belonging in a space where we really, truly feel like we belong, it's often in a space where we really can be us, be who we are, right? Not have to, pretend we're somebody else, wear that mask, right? The sense of belonging happens when we can just show up. So synonyms for belonging and this experience of feeling of being our true selves, being our authentic selves. So I mentioned earlier that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging we often see those terms together. And I'm sharing this diagram with you to help frame, and we're not going to go into diversity, inclusion, and equity, but what I love about this image is that it shows a way in which these terms intersect. And belonging, you'll see, is smack in the middle. And the way that it's described here is belonging takes place when an organization engages the full potential of the individual, where innovation thrives and views, beliefs, and values are integrated. So I think that's such a powerful way of framing this idea of belonging, right? Because if we think about our organizations, do our organizations engage the full potential of our staff members, of our residents, of folks who are, connected with our communities? Is it a space where innovation thrives and where the views, beliefs, and values of folks who are part of our community, where those views, beliefs, and values are integrated, right? So I just want to pause there and ask you to just reflect for a moment on your organizations and thinking about what belonging looks like right now. Are we enacting this? And if not, where are there opportunities? And we'll go into some ideas about that further. All right, so let's talk about just why. Why is it important? And here you'll see Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as you know, it's a psychological theory that really helps us reflect on some basic needs that all of us really require to thrive, right? These, physiological safety, love and belonging, esteem and self-actualization, love and belonging. Right? Smack in the middle. We're talking about friendship, intimacy, family, this sense of connection, right? That it's just something that a basic need for all of us, right? To some degree, feeling this sense of belonging. And there's research out there that describes belonging in relation to aging, and that belonging is crucial to aging well. So, some language here is, a sense of belonging includes feeling secure, being able to participate, being recognized and valued by others, and feeling connected with one's environment. And so studies have shown this connection between a sense of belonging and aging well. And it connects the sense of belonging with these indicators to social and psychological functioning. Other studies show that for some age 65 and older, old age feels like a period of rejection, loneliness, and despair. And this sense of belonging for some was so low that they saw no way out except suicide. Many who suffer from depression may have a deficit in their sense of belonging, right? So these are various studies around older adults and some of their experiences when belonging wasn't a part of their experience. So other studies found that, older adults who age well and sustain their sense of belonging stay involved with life. Right? They're interacting, they're socializing. There's a perception that aging is a process, right? That lasts for life. So it's just a part of life. For some, it's being involved in community activities, volunteering, being involved in social group gatherings. For some, is aging well also involves pets, right? Not even just owning pets, maybe taking part in animal-assisted therapy. There were studies showing that interactions with animals create a connection beyond the older person's own self and stimulates feelings of belonging and hope that may inspire older people to reconnect with others. And, once again, older adults who age well are, doing their best to remain healthy physically and psychologically. So one thing to be aware of is recognizing that for some of our residents, for some of the older adults we work with, that certain life transitions will affect this feeling of belonging, right? So especially if it's new or fresh. So widowhood, losing a spouse, there can be some senses of isolation there. Even the transition from paid work to retirement, passing of friends and family members who are older. So the sense of feeling like my friends the friends I've been with, that I've connected with over the years or decades, are no longer here. Physical and mental health changes, right? So that shift in our bodies, in our mental health, can impact this sense of belonging and aging well. And then adjusting to a new living environment and building new community connections. So thinking about folks who are new to our communities and how are we supporting that adjustment, that life transition for them into this new experience. Okay, so just being aware of what might impact someone's sense of belonging, an older adult's sense of belonging. So ageism, I want to make sure to touch on this as well, because this is another area where it can impact belonging, right? So we know ageism, this is by Dr. Robert N. Butler, process of systematic stereotyping and discrimination against people because they're older. Ageism allows the younger to see older people as different from themselves. Thus, they subtly cease to identify their elders as human beings. And so really thinking about three distinguishable and interrelated aspects of ageism that perpetuate stereotypes that are harmful to older people: prejudicial attitudes, discriminatory practices, and institutional practices. And I think this is important to note too, often without malice, right? Sometimes ageism might play out and we're not trying, to be mean or prejudiced or stereotypical, but sometimes it plays out. And so I share this for us to just pause and be aware of how this might show up and how to pay attention to it. Because what happens then with ageism is it can lead older adults to being treated like outsiders, maybe being invisible, and thereby diminishing their sense of belonging. And of course, in our organizations, it looks different because that's who we serve. But it's paying attention still to those different aspects of where we can further and deepen belonging. And then last thing around ageism and belonging, and just being, or just a reminder of how this may be internalized also by older adults. So some older adults may internalize ageism and accept the stereotypes and myths, that older people are outsiders. So it might not be us as an organization, right? We're doing our best to create these spaces, but for some, this may be internalized. If people see older generations as being part of the other, it can be harder for them to have a sense of belonging to themselves as they age. And recognizing that age doesn't solely define a person, but it could hinder a person from feeling a sense of belonging and being fully integrated into society. And in just a little bit, we're going to talk about this, because when it comes to belonging, as leaders in your organization, it's not solely, yes, it takes intentionality and work around creating, the sense of belonging. And everyone has a responsibility and a role to play in this. And so, for example, you can do all in your power to really be mindful and intentional about creating this sense of belonging in your organizations. But you still may have individuals who still may not feel that, right? And so it's recognizing that while age doesn't define a person, that sometimes these messages are so internalized that it's hard for folks to really feel that sense of belonging as much as we try to create that for them. All right, so I have a video for you, but I am going to actually stop my share because I want to pause, see if there's any questions before we go into this video. Oh, did I stop?
Jennifer, you just closed out your screen.
All right, sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. I've been monitoring the chat and there hasn't been any questions in the chat yet, but would certainly love for folks to put questions or any comments as well that you have in the chat. I just see you, so you closed out the PowerPoint.
I'm sorry.
You closed out the PowerPoint. I just see you.
So tell me do you still see? Am I still sharing my screen?
You're not.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So the video I'm about to share with you is just a sharing around someone's experience with belonging. He'll be doing some reflection around spaces where he has felt he belonged. And I'm just going to ask you to pay attention to what you notice about his experiences with belonging. What did it mean for this individual, right? Thank you, Sarah. I'm always I should have this Zoom navigation down by now, but
that's okay.
Where is home? Where do you belong? All my life, I've been confronted with these questions. Where do I belong? For many of us, belonging means belonging to a family. Well, I was born in Liberia, and I grew up in a family that consisted of more than 100 people. It was a vibrant family. My uncles and aunts functioned as my parents, besides my real parents. I had family members from neighboring countries, from Guinea and Sierra Leone. I felt loved and appreciated. But many a time, I had this vague sense of belonging. For some of us, belonging means belonging to a place. I've lived in many countries in the world. I've lived in Kuwait, in Syria, and in the Netherlands. In Kuwait, I encountered a culture that was very different from mine in many ways. And I thought, if I mastered the Arabic language, if I integrated into the Kuwaiti society, I thought I could belong. I learned Arabic. I integrated into the Kuwaiti society, so much so that at one point I dressed like a Kuwaiti. I had this white gown on. And I moved to Syria because of war. In Syria, I felt that if I read the Syrian history, if I visited all the castles built by the Crusaders and the Muslims during a pivotal period in human history, I thought I could belong. It was the same in the Netherlands. When I came to the Netherlands, I learned Dutch. And I built on my passion for literature. In fact, it was in the Netherlands that I felt that I could read any book that I wanted. But many a times, I felt that I did not belong to all these new places. And when I had this feeling, when I had this sense of not belonging to all these places, memory gave me security. As I reflected more and more on an idealized past, picture of the past. In fact, the pursuit of these idealized pictures of the past led me to becoming a writer. But as I grew up and returned to those places that I remembered, I felt less and less connected. I felt less and less a sense of even belonging to my past. Being part of a group of people, a culture, or living in a physical place isn't what creates a sense of home. Belonging, for me, is a choice of you and me. My sense of belonging is not complete without the feeling, without the conviction that you belong to me. When you look around you, can you say truly that you've contributed to others feeling at home, to others feeling a sense of belonging? Where is home? Where do you belong? Thank you.
So I share that video, as we heard his, experiences living in different countries. He would learn the language. He would, try to fit in, right? And in hopes for this sense of belonging. And I love what he says, towards the end is belonging is a choice, right? It's a choice that we make in our organizations to create that space. And it's a choice that we make as individuals about really stepping into a space and being open to that sense of belonging. So just something to ponder as we think about, belonging in so many different aspects and sharing these different definitions around it. How do we make belonging a choice that we all make for each other in community with one another? Because it's not just up to one person to create belonging, right? It's not up to your CEO to create belonging, or whoever's in charge of the community activities, or whoever. It's a choice, and it's an opportunity for all of us to engage this work together, right? To really create spaces where all of us feel like we belong, and where all of us are doing the work around really helping to facilitate that and share in that together. So I have a few more things to share with you, and then would love some dialogue around this and hear from some of you about your experiences. So understanding belonging, it's an ongoing process, right? You don't just create belonging once and you're done, right? You don't just check the box and move on to the next thing. It's more than a feeling or state of being, right? Even just like we mentioned, it's choice. Belonging can shift based on time, space, and people. Right. So if we think about when we felt like we belonged at any point in our lives, growing up, as well as where we may feel like we belong now, there may have been shifts. There may be shifts in that. Same with folks in our community, right? Did they feel like they belonged before they moved, and now they're trying to, kind of gauge whether or not this is where they belong as well, or feel that sense of belonging, right? Where does that shift? And often it is related to time, space, and people. Belonging takes effort, right? This intentionality, being intentional about fostering these spaces, right? So fostering intentional spaces for residents with shared interests. What kinds of groups exist in our organizations? What kinds of opportunities do we facilitate for folks to come together and connect with one another? Belonging, it might not require people being from the same affinity group. I mentioned earlier, in some cases it is about around identity, right? There's a connection around, maybe it's a religious group or et cetera, but it doesn't have to always be that, right? And once again, and if you get anything from today's presentation, belonging is a shared responsibility, right? That we all play a part in fostering belonging. All right, so cultivating the sense of belonging. How do we further and foster this sense? Analyze the organizational climate, right? What kinds of, have we asked, do you feel like you belong here? Could residents say that? Do staff say that? Are we open to hearing about their perceptions and experiences? And are we willing to involve them in coming up with solutions, right? So we're not just asking them, so what do you think? What's your experience like? Do you feel like you belong? We are asking them, and we are inviting them to gather together for us to come up with solutions and, create the more opportunities if that's what is needed. Promote frequent interactions among residents and staff. The more I work with organizations, the more I hear that, residents are so separate from staff, and there's all these staff things and resident things, and there's this desire for deeper connection, at least some of the organizations I work with. And so inviting us to think about how are we providing a variety of opportunities for residents and staff to connect with others, right? How do we facilitate that? Show care and support. Encouragement has a direct and positive relationship with how much residents and staff feel like they matter. So how are we showing our care and support? As I was putting this presentation together, I thought a lot about COVID and how so many of our organizations stepped up in so many ways. We had to, right? Because during this time where there's so much uncertainty and fear and concern, that there was also so much care and support shown, right? We really had to think outside of the box about how do we make sure that our residents and staff feel like they matter here, that they belong in this space, right? And so it's reflecting on what we did then and maybe practices we've started to incorporate more regularly, and opportunities to, once again, think about what are we doing now and where can we do more? Create a physical and experiential space that reflects the staff and residents, and include staff and residents as part of decision-making committees. So when we talk about physical or experiential space, is there, are there photos? Is there artwork? Is there, how are we kind of creating that space that really helps folks feel that sense of home, right? And I know these are very kind of vague to some degree, open-ended, because what I want you to do is be able to take this and think about your organization. For your organization, what does creating a physical and experiential space that reflects your staff and residents, what does that look like? Right? What does that look like? So Dr. John A. Powell runs, there's a space called the Othering and Belonging Institute. Othering and Belonging Institute. And he does a lot of research on othering and belonging on a global scale. And I love this quote from him because I think it speaks much to, that this sense of division and distancing, that othering, when we other someone, when we make someone feel like they don't belong, right? That's a problem, right? That's a problem. And that belonging is the solution, right? If we can create a sense of belonging for one another in our organizations, in our communities, across the board, there's so much power in that. And there's so many ways to address this, you're different from me, you're other, this distancing of one another. Our communities and our connections and the sense of belonging is more important now than ever before. So I have one more video for you. And this is Brene Brown, who's done a lot of research on a lot of variety of topics. This one, she talks about belonging. And I want you to pay attention again to what does she share in terms of what belonging looks like and what she's learned in her research.
Belonging. We're wired for love. We're hardwired for belonging. It's in our DNA. But let me tell you what belonging is. The opposite of belonging from the research is fitting in. That's the opposite of belonging. Fitting in is assessing and acclimating. Here's what I should say, be. Here's what I shouldn't say. Here's what I should avoid talking about. Here's what I should dress like, look like. That's fitting in. Belonging is belonging to yourself first. Speaking your truth, telling your story, and never betraying yourself for other people. True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. And that's vulnerable.
All right. So once again, I love Brene Brown. So, but I shared that because in the first video, right, he shared what he did to try to fit in, right? Let me learn this language. Let me make myself fit here, right? And so this sense of belonging, and just a question for you to reflect on is, do your residents, staff, community members, whoever's in your organization, do they feel a sense of belonging, right? Do they feel this sense of not having to just fit in, but to really show up as who they are, to really be themselves, right? And so that's all I have. I really wanted to, I'm hoping for some engagement, questions, time for us to chat and talk about this a bit more. But I'm going to stop my share and excited to engage all of you.
Yeah, Jennifer, thank you so much. We have had one person write a question in the chat, and yeah, would love for folks to put their other questions in the chat, and then certainly unmuting as well. Would love to hear about your experiences as Jennifer has mentioned. But Elizabeth is asking, so how do you deal with somebody, a negative person who's a staff member, who may not be welcoming to residents, maybe hindering this sense of belonging within our communities? How would you instruct staff to manage that?
Well, thank you for the question. I think one thing that to kind of give us pause is what do we know about the staff person, and how have we taken the time to listen to maybe this staff member story and where they've been, right? So when we're talking about belonging, it can be hard to cultivate if it's something that we don't even experience ourselves, right? And so if we ourselves are feeling, othered, if we're not feeling welcome and accepted, if we're feeling that way, then it's almost like that's what the reflection we start giving, right? Sometimes, right? I don't mean to simplify the complexity of varied experiences, but sometimes that might be the case. And so I would take a step back and for somebody that knows this employee, that where there's a trusting relationship, maybe get back up a little bit and get it, what might be going on there. I had a microwave that was supposed to be delivered yesterday. The microwave just stopped, and the warranty company said, hey, we're not even gonna fix it, we're gonna replace it. That's how old the microwave was. So was waiting for the microwave to come, and it didn't come. And so I was called, I was really upset about it. It's a microwave, but I was so upset. And I paused and I checked myself, and I realized I wasn't mad about the microwave. There were other things going on in my life, right? There were other things that I had to pause and pay attention to. And I share that example is, once again, with this employee who is not being welcoming, not creating that sense of belonging. Let's pause and kind of, let's listen, because some of that might not have anything to do with, the residents. It might have everything to do with, how we are engaging this individual. And unfortunately, sometimes it, depending on what the situation is, maybe there are certain individuals who, no matter what we do, may not feel that sense of belonging, but may feel it elsewhere, right? And I say that to say that, for some of us, it just might not be the right space for us. And maybe it's time to find somewhere else where we might feel like we belong more. I hope that's helpful.
Elizabeth, I saw your hand raised and I see you unmuted. Did you have something else you wanted to share?
Well, just that I think it's difficult when you do have a staff person, or it could be a resident, who sort of brings a negative feeling into a space where people are trying to feel comfortable and feel like they belong. And I get, that the negative person, maybe they're feeling uncomfortable. I think that's what you're saying. But it sort of puts a damper on the whole, for everybody else. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to, point that person out and say, hey, cheer up, or, can you just kind of accept being here and helping, instead of making everything a negative, because that would put them on the defensive, and maybe they can't leave, maybe they have to be there. So it's just hard to come up with ways to engage people positively when they're not bringing that sense of community to the group.
Right. Yeah.
So I just have tried different ways of dealing with it, and it's befriending that person and listening to them. But it seems like it is what you said towards the end, that maybe it's just not a good fit for that person, and she might need to find something that fits better.
Right, right. And another thought too is, maybe, is there another department or area? Maybe it doesn't have to be a different organization, but is there a better space that within the organization that may be a better fit? It's just thinking outside of the box. I hear you, Elizabeth. This is not easy stuff. We're dealing with personalities and experiences and the diversity of all that we bring. And it sounds like you have tried so many different options, to try and engage this person and bring them in, because it can impact the community. But is there another place within the organization? Is there another, so just maintaining that relationship, because that person is there for a reason as well for now, right? And so how do you work through that?
Right. Well, the person has a very important position, which is as the receptionist. That is the first person who people talk to and need to talk to on a daily basis. And so it really can set the tone for the whole facility when that one person is not a welcoming person. And I think that it's definitely a dilemma. So, but
Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Thanks for sharing, Elizabeth.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments, experiences that folks have about creating belonging in your communities? Jennifer, if for some folks that may be tuning in who have not had these types of open, hard, as you said, conversations with staff and staff meetings, and asking some of those questions that you had, which I thought were really helpful. And again, we'll be sharing the slides and PDF version after this call today. But for some of us who have never asked those questions within staff meetings or to residents and listening to their responses, what would you say, are kind of the first steps for folks as they kind of think about and evaluate, what is everyone's sense of belonging here? What is my sense of belonging here in my organization?
Right. Thanks, Sarah. It does, I think it really does begin with that self-reflection piece, right? Because if we can't put ourselves in a place where we're understanding what that feeling is, what that sense is, and how we experience it in our own organization, then it's going to be hard to do the work of helping to facilitate that, among others and within our community. And so that self-reflection piece, I'm a huge advocate for, balancing that self-reflection and action. Absolutely, it's important that we facilitate and really try to help really build these spaces, right? And pull others into, so we're doing it together. But action without self-reflection, I think, can be challenging, because once again, we need to be able to understand and feel that sense of, what does this mean then for me as a leader in the organization, and my feeling of belonging? What does that look like? And how do I help cultivate that? And then once we can really hold the mirror to ourselves and really do some deeper reflection on what that looks like for us and means to us, then it's taking the time to listen. And I think, we say, oh yeah, we listen. But sometimes we listen, but we don't hear. We listen, share your information, but we're not really hearing, right, what's underlying some of what folks are sharing, right? And so to really listen is to get under the surface of understanding what might be impacting folks' experiences with belonging in this organization, right? What else might be playing out that we're just not attuned to, that we really need to listen to? right? And so before action really comes to those spaces of opening up the conversation, because folks aren't going to feel like they belong if we're not listening to them, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We do have another question in the chat. Any suggestions for residents who are from very different backgrounds and they're clashing? Suggestions have been made for them to become involved in different activities, even off campus. But how do we make both parties feel like they belong on campus?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, that's I always talk about the beauty and challenge, right? The beauty of diversity and the challenge of diversity. There's so much that we all bring individually and with our unique lived experiences. And when someone's experience has been very different from ours, it's easy for us to butt heads because we just don't understand why. Why do you do things this way? Why are you, why would you do A, B, C, and D? Because this is what I've learned over the decades of my life of how to do things. And so with that, and I know you mentioned that folks had recommended these different ways for folks to engage, organizations, groups, et cetera. But sometimes it might mean taking the focus.
I'm in a Zoom. Oh, you're still in. I'm still in this, like.
Thank you. It might mean focusing on their own experiences first, because some of that might be, yes, this person's very different, but once again, not to simplify people's experiences, but I think there's so much more than meets the eye. And sometimes if we're clashing with someone else, there's some underlying pieces there about how I'm responding, right? That I'm being triggered. I'm being, something's playing out here that is making me uncomfortable or angry or triggering something in me. And so when we can take a step back and allow then for, well, what are my interests, right? So here I am focused on my neighbor who's driving me crazy, but, I love gardening, right? I love, playing mahjong. Like I love these things that will help me kind of stay grounded. And over time, will there be an opportunity is there something shared that we might not realize that we have in common? Right? That maybe one of these groups were actually there together because we just didn't know because we're so busy butting heads that we didn't pause to realize, oh, here, they love to, whatever, go hiking too. And they showed up on this trip as well. So, it's tough, right? It's tough bringing together folks from all backgrounds, from lived experiences that have varied so much and bringing them into these spaces. And, I spent decades working in higher education because we did the same thing with college students. They were coming from all over the place and living away from home for the first time. And we were trying to really cultivate these spaces, the sense of belonging for them in this new space. And so we would do it through organizations, right? So similarly to what we talked about, we would do it with creating space, but food, right? Sometimes it's bringing folks together for certain meals, right? There were lunch groups and dinner groups that we brought together. And so it's allowing that time for them to get to know each other. And taking a step back and listening for the triggers, right? Where might those triggers be, and how do we get them to move beyond what's triggering them into where their commonalities and connections are?
Thanks, Jennifer. Any other questions or experiences anyone would like to share today? Okay. Well, Jennifer, any last information or words of wisdom that you give us? This presentation has been really great. I know that folks will be watching the videos again, and I encourage you to share them with your team members as well to kind of start conversation, continue the conversation that many of you are already having within your organizations around belonging. But Jennifer, would love to just hear any last final thoughts that you have for us today.
Yeah, well, number one is thank you for showing up. I know that everybody's schedules are so busy. So for you to take time to be here, I thank you for your presence. The slide deck will have my contact information. So if you do have questions, the last slide has my email and phone number. So feel free to reach out to me if you do have questions beyond this. The last piece, and I know it was a short video, but that piece by Brene Brown, in her research, finding that the opposite of belonging was fitting in, right? That was eye-opening to me as well when I first heard that and delved into that further. The opposite of belonging is fitting in. So in our organizations, how much are we expecting staff, residents, and others in our organizations to fit into our box? So this is A, B, C, and D, and how much are we truly cultivating a sense of belonging? Right. And so just to reflect on that and think about our organizations and how we do this together. Who do we include? Who can we pull in and engage in our communities so that we are engaging this together? So thank you all.
That's great, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Again, appreciate your time, your expertise with us today. Thank you for giving us so much to think about and reflect on in our own lives. But then also our teams and our organizations as well. So next month, we have a very popular topic. We had this for our housing happenings last year, and it was one of our #1 rated conversations that we had, and it was around hoarding disorder. And so we are going to have that speaker come back again this year. Her name is Lisa O'Neill. She's at the Center on Aging, Associate Director of Education and Policy, the University of Arizona College of Medicine. She's an assistant professor of geriatrics, general internal medicine, and palliative medicine. So she's going to be coming next month in April to talk again with us about hoarding disorder, which I know has been a struggle for many of the residents in which you serve, and it impacts, of course, them, their family members, the staff. And so want to have a conversation about that again next month. So looking forward to all of you joining us. Again, for some housekeeping items, we'll be sending out the PowerPoint, which will have contact information for you to reach out to Jennifer if you have any further questions about today's conversation. And then also we'll be sending out the recording as well. So I hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Have a great rest of the month of March, and we'll see everyone again in April. Thank you all and have a great day.